In this video, we're actually going to teach you your first SQL statements, actually how to write code that interacts with a database. Okay? So the first thing we need to do is figure out how do we create a relation from scratch. So the simplest form for creating a table, and we'll elaborate on this create table statement more as the course goes on, but the simplest form is you say create table, the name of the table, as well as a list of elements in parentheses, and every SQL statement ends with a semicolon. Easy to forget the semicolon, don't though. Okay, so let's go into a little bit more detail about what exactly an element is within a table. Oh, and before we move on, some SQL style databases are particular about the case of their keywords. In general, you really should have all of your keywords, like the create in the table in this example, should be in all caps. Okay, the other important thing to note is whitespace generally doesn't matter for SQL unless it's within strings, which we'll get to in a little bit. Okay, so what are the elements that you can build a table out of? Well, once again, at its core, an element is just an attribute and its type. Attribute, aka a column header name. So in SQLite, which is the version of SQL that we're going to be spending most of our time in reality, things like MySQL and Postgres and other database, other SQL style databases all work almost the same way, except they have minor variations on which types they allow and little edge cases. But in reality, they're all very similar. If you learn SQLite really well, you'll be able to use MySQL after just like an hour of learning what are the minor differences between those. So what are the types in SQLite? Well, there's integer, which is pretty obvious. There's real, aka floating point numbers. There's text, which are strings. And then there's blob, which is basically binary data. That's a thing that we're not going to be using in this class much, if at all. We're primarily working with integers, real values, and text. Okay, so with this information, let's do an example create table. So from our previous video, we wanted to make a relation called show. So we put show in there for the name. Then in parentheses, we say every record in this should have a name, which is textual data, and should also have a favorite show, which is textual data as well. Once again, remember that the type of the attribute comes after the name of the attribute. If you mix those up, SQLite will get upset with you. Okay, so that's how you build the table. Now we're going to talk about, well, let's talk about how do we add data to this table. In order to do that, we need to first talk about values. How do you represent numbers and strings in SQLite? So integers and real values are basically what you expect. If you want to represent a 3, you write a 3. If you want to represent 3.5, you write 3.5. Strings are pretty simple too, except you're only allowed to use single quotes to denote strings. So you have a single quote in the beginning, you have your string, you have single quote at the end. The obvious question you guys should be asking is, well, how do we have a single quote in the middle of a string? Well, a lot like how you escape things in CSV, you escape a single quote with another single quote. So in this example, this is the string Joe's bar. The first character is a J, followed by an O, followed by an E, followed by a single quote, followed by an S, because the first single quote escapes the second one, and you keep going until you actually get an unescaped single quote, which is after that R at the end. Okay? The other important thing to note is that any value can also be null. So in a column that you say this has to be an integer, it really means it has to be an integer and it can be null. Okay, so that you can always have places for missing data. We'll talk about how to use null effectively later on in the course. Okay, so back to our big question, how do we add data to our relation named shows? Well, you do that through a process called insertion. So to insert a single tuple, row, you say insert into, and then the name of the relation, and then you say values, and then in parentheses, a list of values that you want to add to that database, or excuse me, to that relation. Okay, so for example, if we want to represent the fact that Samuel Hunter likes Star Trek, we would say insert into shows, values, parentheses, Samuel Hunter, that's a text field, so we have to represent that with single quotes, comma, and then Star Trek in single quotes as well. So after this insertion, now our shows relation will have one record in there. Okay, so adding data into a database, not too complicated. The next query that we're going to once again elaborate a lot more on as we go on is select. Select is how we ask a database or relation what is in there. So if we have our same relation from before, we could ask, what are all of the favorite shows that are in this class? So we would say select, and then we'd say the name of the attribute, favorite show, from a particular relation, in this case, shows, and don't forget the ever important semicolon at the end. All right, so what this will do is this will give us a list of all of the favorite shows from all of the records in our relation. What order should that be in? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but by default, it doesn't have any particular order. If you care about an order, you use order by. So this is basically the exact same query. It says select favorite show from shows, but at the end we have this order by favorite show. What this means is sort the rows that you're returning, the rows that you're giving to whoever's asking this query, sort them by favorite show. And if you order by a text attribute, it's basically order them alphabetically, or more technically lexicographically. Punctuation and spaces tends to go at the beginning of these lists. But once again, not a big deal. Okay, so this is selecting a particular column, a particular attribute from a relation. You can also select more than one column at a time. So if you say, I want to know what are all of the names and the favorite shows for every person, say, in this relation, you'd say select name, comma, favorite show. And what this will return is a big list of tuples of every person's name and their favorite show paired together. And once again, this is from the relation shows, and it's ordered by favorite show. So it means that the people with favorite shows that are at the beginning of the alphabet will come first, and those with favorite shows at the end of the alphabet will come last in this list. However, sometimes it's really annoying to specify all of the columns if you want to just get all of the columns in a relation. The easy way to just say, give me all of the columns, is to say select star, select asterisk. So if I say select asterisk from shows, order by favorite shows, basically saying, give me all of the attributes in shows, and I don't have to specify them each individually. First index card question. What order should the tuples be returned if there's no order by clause in a SQL statement? All right, so according to the SQL standard, there actually isn't any formal order that the tuples should be given back to you. Some different SQL style systems will give you particular versions, but in reality, you can't expect there to be any particular order. And in fact, asking the same query twice might give you back the columns in a different order than it gave you them the first time. There's no promise here. So the correct answer for here is none of the above. There's no default ordering. If you need a default order, you should specify the order by explicitly. Okay, another kind of tricky question up here next. So in this query, select star from shows, order by name, comma, favorite show. What should the order of the rows be? Now, once again, I haven't taught you this yet, but I want you to think about it before I give you the answer. Okay, so if you just said select star from shows, order by name, this would give you back all of the rows sorted by name, and it's always sorted by ascending from small to big. Now the problem is what happens if multiple students in the class have the same name? Like here I did the example of just name being a first name. There could be many Joshes in this class, for instance. Well, if you specify multiple attributes in the order by, what that does is says, okay, first order by name, but if there are ties, if there are people with the same name, then sort by favorite show. So if my favorite show is Battlestar Galactica and another Josh in the class's favorite show is Star Trek, it would do my row first because Battlestar Galactica is before Star Trek. All right, so the correct answer for this case is first it does ascending by name, and then it also does ascending by favorite show where there are ties for the ordering according to name. All right, and so with that, that is the first three parts of SQL that you need to know. how to create tables, how to insert into those tables, inserting data into those tables, and how to do simple select statements to get the data back out of those tables.